Venezuela drifts into new territory, hunger, blackouts, and government shutdown. Caracas, Venezuela. The courts closed most days. The bureau to start a business? Same thing. The public defender's office? That's been converted into a food bank for government employees. Step by step, Venezuela has been shutting down. This country has long been accustomed to painful shortages, even of basic foods. But Venezuela keeps drifting further into uncharted territory. In recent weeks, the government has taken what may be one of the most desperate measures ever by a country to save electricity, a shutdown of many of its offices for all but 2 half-days each week. But that is only the start of the country's woes. Electricity and water are being rationed, and huge areas of the country have spent months with little of either. Many people cannot make international calls from their phones because of a dispute between the government and phone companies over currency regulations and rates. Coca-Cola FEMSA, the Mexican company that bottles Coke in the country, has even said it was halting production of sugary soft drinks because it was running out of sugar. Last week, protests turned violent in parts of the country where demonstrators demanded empty supermarkets be resupplied. And on Friday, the government said it would continue its truncated workweek for an additional 15 days. Continue reading the main story. There's been plenty of problems, but one thing I haven't seen until now is protests simply to get food, said David Smild, a Caracas-based analyst for the Washington office on Latin America, a human rights group, referring to the demonstrations last week. The growing economic crisis fueled by low prices for oil, the country's main export, a drought that has crippled Venezuela's ability to generate hydroelectric power, and a long decline in manufacturing and agricultural production has turned into an intensely political one for President Nicolas Maduro. This month, he declared a state of emergency, his second this year, and ordered military exercises, citing foreign threats. But the president looks increasingly encircled. American officials say the multiplying crises have led Mr. Maduro to fall out of favor with members of his own Socialist Party, who they believe may turn on him, leading to chaos in the streets. Old allies like Brazil, whose leftist president, Dilma Rousseff, was removed this month pending an impeachment trial, are now openly criticizing Venezuela. José Mujica, the leftist former president of Uruguay, last week called Mr. Maduro crazy like a goat. The regional tensions came to a head last week when Mr. Maduro went on television to chide the Organization of American States, which has criticized Venezuela's handling of the economic and political crises. Mr. Maduro took aim at Luis Almagro, its Secretary General, calling him a longtime traitor and implying he was a spy. Mr. Almagro responded with an open letter blasting the president, calling on him to allow the recall referendum his opponents are pushing this year to remove Mr. Maduro from office. "You betray your people and your supposed ideology with your diatribes without substance," Mr. Almagro wrote. "To deny the people that vote, to deny them the possibility of deciding, would make you just another petty dictator, like so many this hemisphere has had." As the sparring continues, Maria Angel Gonzalez, a 32-year-old mother of 2, is most worried about the retreat of the government from daily life. Venezuela's public schools are now closed on Fridays, another effort to save electricity. So Ms. Gonzalez was waiting in line with her elder child at an ATM, while her husband watched over the other one at home. "Right now, my older girl should be at elementary school and the little one in kindergarten," she said. "My husband and I have been inventing new routines." Ms. Gonzalez, a freelance lawyer, lived a middle-class life until recently. But she says the government shutdown has left her without work and her family without food. The older girl, who understands what's going on, says, "What is there, Mom? Bread, arepas, or nothing?" She said that on a recent night, the family ate a dinner of pasta and ketchup. For Vanessa Arnetta, who lives with 7 relatives in an apartment on the outskirts of Caracas, it's the disappearance of the city's water that is causing the most pain. Water arrives just once a week, on Thursdays, to her neighborhood of San Antonio de los Altos. That day, they quickly divide up the chores. A nephew gets into the shower while another one washes the dishes, Ms. Arnetta says. One of her brothers washes up the bathroom, while someone else fills buckets with water for later. But Ms. Arnetta says the water is now a brownish color and is making her family sick. Many Venezuelans say they have gotten skin irritations from showering or from the inability to bathe and wash their sheets and towels. Her body is filled with small bubbles and they sting horribly, Ms. Arnetta said of one of her sisters. Venezuela's government says the problems are the result of an economic war being waged by elites who are hoarding supplies, as well as the American government's efforts to destabilize the country. But most economists agree that Venezuela is suffering from years of economic mismanagement, including overdependence on oil and price controls that led many businesses to stop making products. Some Venezuelans are channeling their frustrations into demonstrations against the government. Mr. Maduro's opponents, who now control the National Assembly, have been staging weekly protests in support of the recall referendum. Last Wednesday, protesters clashed with police officers who fired tear gas at the demonstrations and were attacked with bottles and rocks. The economic situation of this country is collapse, Pablo Parada, a law student, who was participating last week in a hunger strike in front of the OAS office in Caracas. There are people who go hungry now. Mr. Parada said the purpose of his hunger strike was to pressure the OAS to push Venezuelan officials to allow the referendum to take place this year, the only way he felt the country could recover. There is often little traffic in Caracas simply because so few people, either for lack of money or work, are going out. On a recent day in the downtown government center, pedestrians milled about, but nearly every building including several museums, the public registry office and a social security center was empty, giving the appearance of a holiday. Only the guards were at work. "It's in God's hands now," said one, Luis Rios, echoing a common phrase heard here. Some point out what they see as the absurdity in shutting down services to save the government energy. "I don't see them saving any energy this way," said Euhines Linares, a 38-year-old divorced mother, who was taking care of her children, ages 6 and 8, on a recent Friday when there was no school. "At school you have 40 kids under one light bulb, Indiana one classroom," she said. "Now you have 40 kids at home with the lights on, televisions, tablets, consoles and computers turned on all day. It's illogical." Venezuela's armed forces are caught in the middle. Though never an especially formidable fighting force, they're still the best armed body in the country. Maduro has already militarized much of the country's security apparatus. The recent state of emergency decree leaves the country within a hair's breadth of martial law. As the social crisis escalates, the government is relying more and more on the army for help keeping control of the country. But while the military brass enjoys all the perks of life atop the revolutionary elite, the rank-and-file members are having just as much trouble finding food and medicine as everyone else in the country, turning the military into a kind of wild card, its loyalties too uncertain for anyone to know how they might react when push comes to shove. In a scenario where looting spins out of control and an order comes down to repress it with deadly violence, nobody in Venezuela can really be confident that the soldiers would do as they're told. It's just as likely that the military chain of command would break down, a possibility the brass is keenly aware of. Many Venezuelans, including many in the government itself, are convinced that the current crisis is leading inexorably to a coup attempt. Stuck between the current catastrophe and a government determined to block any peaceful outcome, someone, most often, in Latin America, a mid-ranking officer, is bound to rise up sooner or later. If and when that happens, Venezuela will hold its collective breath. Anything could happen, from a straightforward palace coup leading to a relatively orderly transition to, in the worst case, an open rift between more or less evenly matched parts of the military, leading to the kind of conflict you shudder to even picture. Even in the best of cases, though, where the military maintains its cohesion, a coup would be a calamity for Venezuela. For years, the strange, cult-like political movement that is Chavismo has invested huge sums to prepare for just such a scenario. The Chavistas have gone to great lengths to ensure that the hardest of their hardcore supporters are well armed and organized into effective irregular fighting forces. In fact, Venezuela may be the only country in the world with a government-funded and organized urban guerrilla force, set up proactively precisely to destabilize the country should the government that created it lose power. Courts closed most days. The bureau to start a business? Same thing. The public defender's office? That's been converted into a food bank for government employees. Step by step, Venezuela has been shutting down. This country has long been accustomed to painful shortages, even of basic foods. But Venezuela keeps drifting further into uncharted territory. In recent weeks, the government has taken what may be one of the most desperate measures ever by a country to save electricity, a shutdown of many of its offices for all but 2 half-days each week. But that is only the start of the country's woes. Electricity and water are being rationed, and huge areas of the country have spent months with little of either. Many people cannot make international calls from their phones because of a dispute between the government and phone companies over currency regulations and rates. Coca-Cola FEMSA, the Mexican company that bottles Coke in the country, has even said it was halting production of sugary soft drinks because it was running out of sugar. Last week, protests turned violent in parts of the country where demonstrators demanded empty supermarkets be resupplied. And on Friday, the government said it would continue its truncated workweek for an additional 15 days. Continue reading the main story. There's been plenty of problems, but one thing I haven't seen until now is protests simply to get food, said David Smild, a Caracas-based analyst for the Washington office on Latin America, a human rights group, referring to the demonstration. Venezuela drifts into new territory, hunger, blackouts, and government shutdown. Caracas, Venezuela. The